Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for this CND webinar, Stop US Nukes Coming to Lakenheath. Just about a month ago, we heard the news that US nuclear weapons are likely to come back to Britain by reading a tweet. Hans Christensen, the great nuclear weapons expert who works for CIPRI and provides an enormous amount of detailed information, tweeted that he'd seen on a US Department of Defense budget projection that essentially things were being done to nuclear storage site in Britain, which can be easily understood as US nukes coming back to Britain after an absence of quite a number of years. The informed opinion is that the site for these returning nuclear weapons will be RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk. So what we're going to do this evening is hear more about the circumstances of these nuclear weapons coming back to Britain. We're going to hear about the base at which they will be located, and we're going to hear from two colleagues in Europe who work in anti-base, anti-nuclear weapons campaigns, where the same type of nuclear weapons are being cited. That's in Germany and Belgium. We're also going to hear in some detail from the chair of Norwich CND, Sue Wright, who will be telling us about both what's going on at the base and what we're planning for our national demonstration at Lakenheath on Saturday, the 21st of May. So we're going to do all of that in just about an hour, and we're going to hear your questions as well. So thank you for joining us this evening. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tom Unterrainer, who is chair of CND, who is going to outline the wider situation. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you to everyone who's joined us. Thank you to our guests speaking of this very important webinar this evening, because I can't really overestimate the importance of this development at RAF Lakenheath and the announcement that we're discussing this evening, because the potential return of US nuclear bombs to the UK was announced without fanfare and, more importantly, without any discussion, without any debate, deliberation or opportunity for dissent within Britain's so-called democratic institutions. There was no official announcement from the British government, no ministerial statement to Parliament, no press conference with representatives from the US Department of Defense. There wasn't even a distinct press or information release from the United States government. When the British government was asked about this development by the Green MP Caroline Lucas, the Parliamentary Undersecretary of State James Heappey gave the following non-reply. He wrote this: "The MOD, the Ministry of Defence, is unable to comment on US spending decisions and capabilities, which are a matter for the US government. It remains long-standing UK and NATO policy to neither confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons at a given location." So far, so mysterious. News of this development, as Kate said, emerged only after Hans Christensen from the Federation of American Scientists noticed the addition of the UK to the list of nuclear storage sites to be upgraded under NATO's $384 million infrastructure investment program. In the 2022 US Department of Defense budget, storage sites in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands and Turkey were listed. in the 2023 budget, the UK appears on the list. Let's untangle this. Nuclear developments, all of them, have almost always operated under a veil of secrecy. For instance, Britain's atomic programme was done in secret, with not even the then cabinet of Her Majesty's government being notified. More recently, the current government announced in its integrated review that it would no longer give public figures for our, that's their, operational stockpile, deployed warheads, or deployed missile numbers. Secrecy, or at least a lack of transparency, extends to the arrangements under which the United States stations nuclear bombs elsewhere in Europe. I'm certain that Marion and Ludo, two of our other speakers, will talk more about this aspect, but suffice to say that the US and NATO have never been 100% clear on the numbers of nuclear bombs stationed under nuclear sharing agreements in various European countries. When asked about the possibility of further US weapons, nuclear weapons, coming to Europe under NATO auspices, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said in December 2021 that, and this is a quote, "We have no plans of stationing any nuclear weapons in any other countries than we already have these nuclear weapons as part of our so-called, in inverted commas, deterrence, and that have been there for many years." Some have interpreted Stoltenberg's comments as meaning that although Lakenheath's nuclear storage facilities are to be updated, NATO has ruled out the stationing of US nukes for the time being. I don't think this makes very much sense at all. I'd interpret Stoltenberg's comments another way. Throughout his comments, he is speaking as the head of NATO. When he says we and our, he is talking about the nuclear armed alliance that is NATO. In this context, it's worth noting that the UK's nuclear weapons are counted as part of NATO's so-called nuclear capabilities and have been for many years. This response from Stoltenberg is typical of the prevalent opacity when it comes to nuclear questions. RAF Lakenheath was the place where the US Air Force stored nuclear gravity bombs historically. By the early 2000s, 110 B-61 bombs were stored there, and US F-15E aircraft were stationed there for the express purpose of dropping these bombs on command of the President of the United States. These bombs were eventually removed without fanfare, without major comment, in the later 2000s, and it was only in 2008 that their total removal was confirmed again by our friend Hans Christensen. For the first time at this point since 1954, the United States did not store nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom. Prior to our discovering what was happening with respect to the nuclear storage capabilities, it had already been announced that Lakenheath was to become the first location in Europe for the new US Air Force nuclear-capable F-35 bombers. These arrived in December of 2021, just a few months ago. 24 of them are stationed at the base, and the US Air Force is scheduled to commence training for the use of this new generation of guided nuclear bombs, the B-61-12s, in the coming year. These bombs will come into production very shortly, like within the next few days or weeks. According to our friend Hans Christensen, these bombs look set for shipping to Europe in 2023, where they will replace the existing B-61-3 and 4 bombs already stationed in sites across Europe. So it looks almost certain that the US intends to station nuclear bombs in the UK once more. This is a major negative development, and one that we, CND, take very seriously indeed. We're not alone in taking this development seriously. Our friends in the European and wider peace movements, anti-war movements and anti-nuclear movements are alert to what is happening, and they stand with us in our opposition. even without the massively increased nuclear tensions that have been developing over the past few years, and which have become even more acute over the past months, our opposition will be sharp. We know that even in the most stable of times, increasing the US's nuclear bootprint would create instability. And let's face it, we're not living through particularly stable times. We know that regardless of other circumstances, a nuclear storage site and an airbase for nuclear capable bombers becomes a target for a nuclear strike. We need to make everyone aware of this risk and link it to all of the other very good reasons for opposing nuclear weapons. We know that
7 minutes now.
Okay, I'm almost finished, Kate. Thank you. We know that every new nuclear development brings with it new risks, new dangers, and new threats in a local, regional, and in international contexts. This is why CND has called for a protest at Lakenheath on the 21st of May as the first step in our campaign to stop US nuclear bombs from coming to the UK. Our ask of you is simple. Spread the word. If you can, organise transport from wherever you are to that base on the 21st of May. And most importantly of all, join us in our protests. Make sure you join CND and be part of our campaign to rid UK, Europe, and the world of the nuclear threat. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Tom. That's brilliant. Now we're going to turn to Sue Wright. Sue, as I mentioned, is chair of Norwich CND, which is the closest CND group to RAF Lakenheath base, and the group has been very active over the years in getting rid of the nuclear weapons in 2008, as well as doing many other peace activities. So Sue, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Kate. I wasn't actually involved myself in 2008, but I've heard a lot about it from my fellow members. And so I'm going to say a bit about the actual Lakenheath, RAF Lakenheath. And I may repeat some of what Tom has already said, so please forgive me if it comes across as repetition. So despite being an RAF station, Lakenheath only hosts the United States Air Force. The host wing is the 48th Fighter Wing, also known as the Liberty Wing. In 1945, British squadrons left Lakenheath because it was being upgraded to a very heavy bomber airfield. 29 United States Air Force super fortresses arrived, and the base began its life as an American aircraft carrier. The first nuclear bombs arrived in Britain in September 1954. In 1959, Charles de Gaulle insisted that all non-French nuclear-capable forces should be withdrawn from France, so the Liberty Wing came from France to Lakenheath. The presence of nuclear weapons has made the US base at Lakenheath a target for protesters for decades. There were annual John Bug walks to keep open the footpaths that used to cross the base, now rerouted around the perimeter, unfortunately. Peace camps were established at various times outside the gates from the 1970s through to 2008. There were demonstrations in 1986 against the bombing of Libya, in 2003 against the war in Iraq, and in 2006 against nuclear weapons. On the 18th of May in 2008, campaigners besieged RAF Lakenheath to protest against the nuclear bombs there, and campaigners unfurled banners and chanted during their 4-hour protest. Let's hope that on the 21st of May 2022, something similar will be going on. The base commander at RAF Lakenheath could never confirm or deny the presence of nuclear weapons. But in 2008, it was announced by the American Association for the Advancement of Science that nuclear weapons had been withdrawn from Lakenheath for safety reasons. For the first time since 1954, the United States did not store nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom. In 2021, RAF Lakenheath became home to the first of 48 of the US Air Force's new F-35 multi-role fighters. To accommodate these new aircraft and the people involved with it, an F-35 campus has been constructed, including maintenance hangars, 6 F-35 flight simulators, a munitions maintenance facility, residential accommodation, a hospital and a school, among other things. The Federation of American Scientists report that RAF Lakenheath was not on the list of active sites in the 2016 contract for the upgrade of the nuclear weapons storage sites in Europe. But US budget documents indicate the base has since been added to that list. As Tom said, the US Air Force used to store nuclear gravity bombs at Lakenheath, which in the 1990s was equipped with 32 underground storage vaults. By the early 2000s, there were a total of 110 B-61 gravity bombs in these vaults. After nuclear weapons were withdrawn nearly 2 decades ago, the empty storage vaults were kept in caretaker status. The F-15 fighter bombers retained their nuclear capability, but at a lower operational level. In recent years, there have been rumours about nuclear exercises at the base. So what is going on? The addition of the United Kingdom to the list of nuclear storage locations being upgraded in Europe signals a change in the nuclear status of RAF Lakenheath. It's unclear if nuclear weapons have been returned to the base yet, or if NATO is upgrading the base to be capable of receiving nuclear weapons in the future. This nuclear upgrade comes as RAF Lakenheath is preparing to become the first US Air Force base in Europe equipped with the nuclear capable F-35s. The US Air Force is scheduled to begin training the nuclear units in Europe within the next year to receive the new B-61-12 guided nuclear bombs. It's possible the first of these bombs will be shipped to Europe in 2023. The upgrade at RAF Lakenheath could potentially be intended to increase the flexibility of the existing nuclear deployment within Europe without increasing the number of weapons. Matt Cannard, writing for Declassified UK, said, "The MOD have said that any US operation from a base in the UK is considered on a case-by-case basis, and this includes the legal basis for any proposed activity." They added that use of a base in the UK is permitted based on any proposed activity being in accordance with UK law and the UK's interpretation of relevant international law. However, neither the US nor the UK official interpretation of international law recognises the UN Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But the UK government have signed and ratified the Cluster Munitions Convention, which outlaws cluster bombs, whereas the US have not signed or ratified that convention.
You've had 7 minutes now, Sue.
Okay, nearly finished. So presumably the UK's interpretation of relevant international law would be okay for the US base to have the cluster bombs because they haven't signed the convention, even though the UK have signed it. As Kate has already said on another occasion, British control of these bases remains negligible and public insight into their activities remains severely curtailed. Despite operating on UK territory, these bases are firmly under American control. This situation needs to change, and Britain's status as the US's unsinkable aircraft carrier has to end. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Sue. Looking forward to meeting you in person on the 21st. Okay, so now we're moving to our first European speaker, Marion Küpker. Marion is spokeswoman for the Büchel is Everywhere, Nuclear Weapons Free Now campaign. She's international coordinator for DFG-VK against nuclear weapons. She's peace officer on nuclear weapons at the Fellowship of Reconciliation in Germany and received the 2019 Aachen Peace Award. So you're very well situated to tell us about these latest developments from the German perspective, and perhaps a little bit about your campaign there to get rid of the weapons there too. So Marion, over to you. Oh, before you start, I've just been reminded by my colleague, please everybody put your questions in the Q&A box. So don't hold back. You can put them there or you can put them in chat if you prefer, but let's have some good discussion when our speakers are finished. So sorry, Marion, over to you.
Okay, I'll give you a quick overview. We are a campaign about 70 groups and peace organizations in Germany to work on to oust the US nuclear weapons, which are based on the Büchel air base in Western Germany. And not only to oust them, also to stop the modernization into the B6112 and to get our government to sign and ratify the treaty on the TPNW. So we have in Büchel nuclear sharing, which means we have 15 right now. We used to have about 20 B61 bombs. We have pilots there with German fighter jets to exercise a NATO nuclear war. And right now we are in a situation that we are having two bases actually we have to work on, because the Büchel air base, it's a German air base, is also getting modernized because of the B6112, new fence, new runway, new shelters for the new bomb in the hangars and so on. So yeah, that's where we are working on. And also with this would go a new fighter jet upgrade. Our government right now plans to buy the F-35 US stealth fighter. So far, what we did in the past was this big team to lobby in our government that they fulfill our demands. Last year we had in September a German-wide election, and since the Green Party got out big and also the Democratic Party is involved now, and the Liberal Party, and many of them actually had signed the parliamentarian appeal for demanding from our government to sign and ratify the treaty. So we were hoping that since they are in power now, that we would have some success, that they would do something. But as it is normally this ample coalition, because of the colors they have, they decided differently. They decided about getting this nuclear fighter, even though it hasn't been decided which one by then. So now what's also very important about the Büchel air base is that Hans Christensen just recently told us that even the old B61 bombs play a role in possible war against Russia or Ukraine, because Hans Christensen told us that any jet fighter being used to transport nuclear weapons can be air-fueled, which means getting new ones or having them landed in between on other bases closer to the border. They could be used actually for going deep into Russia. That was new for us. So let me look where I'm at. Yeah. Since this upgrade is going on the base in Büchel, the pilots and the tornadoes are being deployed now in Norwich from June 2022 until 2026. And yeah, and since the war in Ukraine started, our government also decided, they call it 100 billion euros special asset for the German army. And their idea is, this came actually from the Democratic Party, to change the constitution. And for this, they need 2/3 of the German parliamentarians and use this money to buy 35 F-35 bombers. This is going to be decided by Friday next week, whether this change of law is going to take place. So that's something we are working on right now. But we don't have much hope. The only thing our new government did for us after the last election was that they agreed on, that time as the first NATO state, to send an observer to the state conference in Vienna now in June. So, but doesn't mean that they're gonna go all the time or participate all the time every year, only this time. So it's not actually a big deal. We don't know what will come out, but right now we have from quite a lot of different peace organizations who are all ICANN partner organizations. We have 40 peace activists going to Vienna and to join and support the conferences and protests and side of events, etc. Besides that, we are still protesting in Büchel. We have still a day with high-ranking religious leaders there. We still have in July, when the TPNW treaty was first 5 years ago, started. IPPNW and ICANN, they're gonna have action days in Büchel. I look how much the time is to, okay. And yeah, we have an international week again in July with people from the UK and from Belgium and Germany. And we are just going on with our actions. We also have quite some trials. We already have 15 complaints to the Constitutional Court, which all got rejected so far. One is still open, but there are more people following from people who did over the last years go-in actions into the base. And one trial of 2 women, including myself, is going to the, or has an appeal at the Humanitarian Court of, no, at the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. So because these weapons are illegal, as we understand, and actually the courts would have to stand on our side and not on the side of our government defending it. Yeah, that's what's going on in Germany.
Fantastic. Perfect timing, Marion. So thanks very much indeed for that. That's great. And then our final speaker is Ludo De Brabander. Ludo is spokesperson for Vrede VZW, which is a Belgian peace organisation. He'll be known to some of you, I'm sure, as a member of the coordinating committee of the No to War, No to NATO network. And in that capacity, of course, he's been in Britain for a number of demonstrations, national demonstrations organised by CND and others against NATO. And he's also the author of several books. So, Ludo, over to you.
Thank you, Kate, and good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about the situation in Belgium. Belgium is currently one of these 5 European countries with US nuclear bombs on its soil. And in today's slide, it might be interesting to briefly outline how those weapons of mass destruction got in my country and why also it's so difficult to get rid of them. In 1962, a governmental law was voted to allow the free passage of NATO troops through Belgian territory, as well as their stationing. At the time, a Belgian member of parliament wanted to add an article to the law to exclude nuclear weapons under the provisions of the law. But the government convinced the initiator of this amendment and this article to withdraw it, assuring him and other MPs that the deployment of nuclear arms would be, of course, only happen under parliamentarian authorization. But this never happened. On the basis of archives, we've recently found out that the government was lying then and already started the preparations for the arrival of nuclear weapons 3 years earlier in '59. In '63, the US deployed secretly and with governmental approval, as we know now, nuclear gravity bombs on Belgian territory without any parliamentarian debate or permission. And this incident illustrates how democracy is inferior to military interests and strategies of the US and NATO. And it's therefore, what Tom said, not surprising that there is no official announcement of the possible arrival of new nuclear weapons in Lakenheath, nor neither a debate or in parliament or in society. Until today, the government maintains a policy of ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying the presence of nuclear bombs in Belgium, blocking any normal parliamentarian debate. And I think that's the purpose, to avoid parliamentarian debate. However, it's a public secret that about 100 US B-61 nuclear bombs have been deployed in 5 European countries as part of NATO's nuclear sharing policy. Belgian fighter jets, as in Germany, as in Netherlands, and in Italy, are responsible for employing these nuclear bombs in wartime, which is in breach with the NPT that prohibits the transfer to or control over nuclear weapons by non-nuclear weapon states. And these bombs will soon be replaced by new B-61-12 nuclear bombs as part of a 10 billion US modernization program, the most expensive nuclear project ever. They will be equipped with a new guided tail kit assembly and variable yield options. The mixture of both accuracy and low yield options make them the most dangerous bomb in the US nuclear arsenal. They could be seen by war planners as more usable. And a lower yield and more accurate bomb can be used without having to fear the mass indiscriminate killing of civilians through explosive force or radioactive fallout. And that's why the new B-61-12 could lower the threshold for the deployment of nuclear weapons, eroding totally the concept of deterrence. By the way, in 2018, Belgium also bought new 34 new F-35 fighter jets that will be nuclear capable, or some of them, for these new bombs. Various surveys show that the majority of the Belgian population doesn't want nuclear bombs in Belgium. According to the survey 2 years ago, 77% of the population wants Belgium to join the TPNW. And I think we have similar and even higher figures in other countries in Europe. The population's anti-nuclear weapons position was also translated cautiously into the coalition agreement in Belgium, in which the government promised, and I quote, to explore how the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons can give new impetus to multilateral nuclear disarmament, end of quote. Nevertheless, Belgium voted twice against the resolution in the General Assembly of the United Nations that welcomed the TPNW and asked countries to accede. All NATO member states rejected the resolution. NATO, as you know, is openly campaigning against the TPNW and a global nuclear disarmament regime calling itself a nuclear alliance since 2010. The pressure from the US and NATO to maintain the nuclear deterrent is huge. The Belgian government is divided over the issue. Greens and Social Democrats, and in Belgium we have a large coalition with 7 parties, want Belgium to remove the nuclear bombs and sign the TPNW. Now the Christian Democrats and other Democrats, another coalition partner, now seems to make or to be making an opening and will soon submit a resolution asking that our country at least participate in the TPNW meeting of state parties in Vienna as an observer, as Norway and Germany already did in their coalition agreement. But the liberal parties, we have two liberal parties, are blocking each opening and wants Belgium to remain loyal to NATO's nuclear sharing policy. The peace movement is campaigning to pressure the government to be serious about nuclear disarmament and sign the TPNW. And 2020, under the initiative of the peace movement, this was one of the actions, a part of actions at the military base in Kleine Brogel, where the nuclear bombs are stationed. 150 mayors, which is 1/4 of all mayors, joined an appeal asking the government to sign the TPNW. I think it's very important to emphasize also local pressure up to the government, and because sometimes it's similar for local politicians to sign a statement. And to conclude, and now I put it into context, the war in Ukraine reminds us of the danger of a nuclear escalation. President Putin has repeatedly threatened to use nuclear weapons. Russia's nuclear arsenal numbers some 2,000 tactical nuclear weapons that can be eventually deployed on the battlefield. New technological developments like hypersonic weapons and the development of low-yield nuclear weapons undermine the theory of mutual deterrence. Defenders of nuclear sharing, they claim that nuclear weapons guarantee our security, but the opposite is true. The nuclear weapons bases will be the first targets in case of a nuclear attack. The danger of a nuclear war in Europe underlines the absolute need for de-escalation and creation of diplomatic space to negotiate a political settlement based on the principles of a common and divisible security between US, NATO and Russia, and also return to the Minsk agreements between Russia and Ukraine. So to conclude again, in every crisis, there is an opportunity. The recent nuclear threats may set people in motion for nuclear disarmament. When hopefully the war in Ukraine can soon be ended, Europe's political world needs to reflect on lessons learned. And as peace movement, I think we need to increase pressure on them. One of these lessons should be that we need to get rid of the threat of nuclear Armageddon. And that's why we'll have to reestablish a constructive political environment in which negotiations towards European, to begin with nuclear disarmament, is possible for all nuclear weapon systems in Europe. And this is achievable, I think, if we rebuild relations with Russia based on mutual respect for each other's security interests and confidential building measures, as was agreed already in the Helsinki Final Act of 1975, long time ago, but that helped to create the conditions for several disarmament agreements. So I hope to see you on the 21st of May in Lakenheath. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ludo. That was very, very interesting. Particularly what you were saying about the mayors and their organisation against the weapons and so on, and for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And we do some work here in Britain trying to generate support from either mayors or local authorities, councils and so on, whether in towns or cities, to get them to show their support for the TPNW, and it is building and developing. So we'll aspire to get the same level of support from mayors that you do. So that's a very good example for us. So now we've got a few questions that have come in. So I'm going to take the first few and then share them with the speakers, and then ask each speaker in turn to come back on any element of them that you wish to comment on. Don't feel obliged to try all of them if you don't want to. And if there's anything additional you want to add based on what previous speakers have said, feel free to do so. So first of all, I've got a couple here about the relationship to Ukraine. So first of all, I've got, how relevant is this Lakenheath deployment to the war in Ukraine? And I've also got, will this be seen as an escalation of the nuclear threat by Russia? So that's on that question. Then I've got one that's more specifically about Lakenheath itself. Is it true that there were nuclear accidents at the Lakenheath base while the bombs were there? That's another one. And then I've also got, one talking about the P5 statement at the end of last year. The P5 was the 5 nuclear weapons states, the ones that are acknowledged by the NPT. At the end of last year, the P5 announced that they reiterated the Gorbachev-Reagan statement that nuclear war is too dangerous to happen and must never take place. Is that now completely meaningless? Not only because of the war in Ukraine, but also because of the escalation of nuclear arsenals and developments like these at Lakenheath. So, does the P5 statement have any meaning whatsoever? Okay, so those are what we have at the moment. Continue, please, audience, to put your questions in. And Tom, I'm going to ask you first if you've got anything you would like to comment on there.
Yeah, with regards to the P5 statement, I mean, I wouldn't want to identify those sentiments exactly with the sort of stuff we hear from the P5, which is the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council. But of course, it remains true that a nuclear war can never be won and therefore should never be fought. That's the form of words that they were resurrecting. That's the form of words that were used by Reagan and Gorbachev in the 1980s. It was true in the 1980s. In fact, it's been true since nuclear weapons were first developed that a nuclear war can never be won and therefore must never be fought. And it is absolutely true in the here and now. And the terrifying thing that we need to deal with is that nuclear risks and nuclear dangers are more sharply posed now than they have ever been in the past few decades. We know that, you know, things have deteriorated drastically over the past few years, that nuclear threats have been wielded, that the succession of nuclear developments and upgrades, so-called, to nuclear capabilities have made the world a much more dangerous place. The situation looked very bad before this year, and hence the question that was put to Jens Stoltenberg, and I quoted his reply in my contribution earlier. Things were bad, but there were sort of glimpses of hope, and those glimpses of hope included, you know, the commitment of various NATO states to send observers to the first state party meeting of the TPNW in Vienna. CND will be there, and we hope as many people as possible, NATO members or not, will be there. But that was a glimpse of hope in 2021. Likewise, you know, there was active and full-throated discussion in Germany about whether or not that country should remain as a nuclear sharing state. You know, it was actively discussed amongst the parties which now compose the new German government. So there were glimmers of hope. I'm afraid that the situation as it is posed now in May 2022, it was quite difficult to locate glimmers of hope. It's quite difficult to locate them. And so when, you know, people ask and raise questions about, you know, the link between what is happening in Lakenheath, other nuclear developments, and the situation in Ukraine, it might be quite difficult to draw a direct line between them, other than the idea that, you know, the preparations for Lakenheath were not pulled out of the hat a couple of months ago. They've been in the long-term planning, as have the new developments for the new bombs and the new fighter bombers, which will be stationed in Europe. Nuclear escalation was already underway. But in the context of where the nuclear threat is so sharply posed, where the nuclear taboo has been shattered quite visibly again and audibly over the last few months, every single expansion of the US nuclear blueprint presents danger. Every new escalation in terms of new nuclear developments, wherever they come from, makes the situation much, much worse and much more dangerous, which is why our campaign, why CND and our sister organisations across Europe are doing vital work, both to alert everybody to the risks and actively campaigning to prevent new risks from being presented, which is why the demonstration on the 21st is so important, not just in the British context, but in the European and the international context. And we should do everything we can to make sure as many people are there, and that our campaign snowballs from that point onwards to alert everyone to the real risks and dangers we face.
Thanks very much, Tom. Sue, over to you for any comments. You're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. There was a question specifically about Lakenheath accidents, and I know of at least two. There was one in 1956 when a B-47 bomber crashed. It exploded. The bombs that were stored nearby were showered with burning or aviation fuel, and each bomb had a yield 10 times greater than the Hiroshima bomb. The crash did not ignite the high explosives, so no detonation occurred, but apparently it was a miracle. So, and a lot of people were very, very scared, started running away, and yeah, it was referred to not just a panic but a stampede. And then the second one was in 1961, when a part aircraft caught fire after the pilot jettisoned his fuel. The fuel tanks ruptured, and the flames engulfed the nuclear bomb, which was underneath the aircraft, leaving the nuclear weapon scorched and blistered. Again, it's a miracle that nothing worse happened, but I mean, those are two that have been reported, I know of, and I'm sure there have been more.
Thanks very much, Sue. And what's particularly disturbing about those that you've referred to is that they're both pilot error, really. And what's to say that pilot error is not going to occur again? You know, I mean, I know there are many safety systems and so on, but those, I'm sure local people are very concerned about the weapons coming back to Lakenheath. You know, it massively increases the risk, not only of accidents and so on, like you've referred to, but also, of course, making that base a target in any forthcoming war. So very, very dangerous for local people in particular. Marion, would you like to come back on any of those questions?
Yes, about what the rule of Russia that this nuclear threat now is going on, whether they started it in a way. They started it was threatening, but we feel, or I feel here personally, that we want all the last years that nuclear deterrence is especially dangerous in a crisis like we are having now. And we were also always afraid about nuclear accidents because of the eastern expansion towards the border of Russia. Thinking about they are doing it every year, many times. They're doing these nuclear exercises and NATO exercises actually, with hundreds of thousands of ground troops plus planes. And I found it very interesting also what Hans Christensen wrote in his one, he shared with us in a video conference. He was saying that Russia on the one hand is accused to escalate, to de-escalate, and then there was a US general who said, no, NATO actually is accused to escalate to win. But when it was looked at independent analysis, they found out that actually it's the US who has a doctrine escalate to win. And when we think about the first use option in the NATO doctrine, or even thinking about who started to cancel in the last year's START treaties. So the escalation is going on all over these years to prepare, maybe to make a war possible against Russia. And I don't think we can overlook this. So maybe Russia is coming up with bringing attention to that by scaring us, which, I don't know whether it's a good idea or not, but the threat was already there before, that any minute we can be incinerated. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Marion. And just to clarify CND's position on NATO, because someone was asking about it, I think, in the chat, CND is for the dissolution of NATO, as is the No to War, No to NATO network. And on that note, Ludo, over to you for any responses you want to make on those questions.
Well, I would like maybe share some thoughts about considerations about the first questions about the arrival of new nuclear bombs in Lakenheath. In a context, because I probably this was already decided before the war broke out in Ukraine. But now, of course, it puts it into another context and a more dangerous context. I think it can contribute to a new arms race, nuclear arms race, in the sense if these weapons are deployed. And now, as we heard, that Finland is probably applying for NATO membership, as Sweden will probably do. This add to the tensions with Russia, of course, and Russia already threatened also to answer and to deploy then in one of these answers eventually with new weapon systems. And I think it was meant also nuclear weapon systems. Remember, there is Kaliningrad with Iskander missiles, and this is a possible reaction from the Russians that they will deploy nuclear weapons in Kaliningrad, and in turn then the next step could be that Poland maybe will station US nuclear arms, as the Vice Prime Minister Kaczynski already openly said. We are ready to accept them and to deploy them in Poland. So you see, this is a very dangerous situation with actions and reactions, and increases, of course, the danger of nuclear war. Or this, and also the accidents that accompany them, these famous broken arrows, which we have already had many, I think 70 or so, this kind of broken arrows, so these nuclear incidents. So I think it's a very dangerous situation, and it can bring us back to the situation we had in Europe in the 80s, the Euro missile crisis. So this is a negative thing, but the positive on the other side of the coin is, of course, that nuclear arms are again, at least in Belgium, and I think in many other countries, are back on the political agenda. So there's an awareness. When I went many times speaking around in the country, and many young people, especially climate activists now, also are concerned about the possibility of a nuclear war. And so there is a kind of awareness that this is dangerous and that it should stop. And so I hope maybe when it escalates, that at the other side, there will be a huge, maybe there will be new massive demonstrations. I don't know. I don't know if this will happen, but it's a huge opportunity for us as a peace movement, to answer that and to use this opportunity to really push forward for nuclear disarmament towards our political leaders.
No, absolutely. And I think the parallels with the 1980s are particularly interesting because what terrified us here in Britain, I'm sure it was the same across Western Europe, was the idea that these weapons that were coming to Britain and Europe meant that a future nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union, as it then was, would take place in Europe. They wouldn't bother to kind of nuke each other. They would have that war in Europe. And I think that that has to be what these bombs at these bases we're talking about, that's what they're for. They're for use in Europe. They're not intercontinental ballistic missiles. They're for kind of local and regional use. So it is very, very terrifying indeed. But of course, not only did we get rid of the nukes from Lakenheath one time first in 2008, we also got rid of those intermediate range nuclear weapons from Europe in the 1980s. Their eradication was completed by 1991 or something like that. And we have to have the confidence that we can do that again. Now, before we start to draw to a close, I've got a couple more questions, so I'll just read them out, and then if anyone wants to comment on them, please do. I hope somebody will. So I've got, is a nuclear-free Europe really possible? So that's one. And the other one is, can NATO states sign up to the TPNW? So, because we've touched on the TPNW quite a bit, so I think that's quite a good one and useful. So that's our final two questions. So, anyone like to have a go at them? Don't hold back, Ludo.
Go on.
Ed?
Okay, now just shortly on the nuclear free Europe. As we last year, we already we campaigned in several military bases, as it was in UK, in Germany, in Italy, and in the Netherlands. With this proposal to have a nuclear weapon free zone in Europe, a nuclear free Europe, which is possible. And of course, it means Europe. It means also the European side of Russia up to the UK. And it's possible because, and especially in this is what I said before, I hope after the war, and I hope it will finish soon, maybe there is an opportunity, that lessons are learned in the sense that nuclear threat we came closer to this nuclear threat, and that we should get rid of it, and that the only way to get rid of it is to make Europe nuclear weapon free as a weapon free zone, which means negotiations, which means confidential building measures, which means verification mechanisms. And it's not something new. There are many zones in the world, like the whole of Africa and the whole of Latin America, as a weapon-free zone. So I think we should copy that example and bring it also to Europe as another step towards a nuclear weapon-free world.
Okay, thank you very much. Marion, you've got your hand up there. Go ahead.
Okay. I personally believe a nuclear-free Europe is possible. Because nuclear war doesn't matter whether they are called tactical nuclear weapons or strategical ones, they are not usable at all. For example, this lower yield B6112 nuclear weapons, they still have 50 kilotons of explosive power. And this is more than 3 times the explosion in Hiroshima. So it's not a small, like some people, or that's what they want to make us believe. It's not a tactical weapon which can be used. And it probably takes a little bit time, but right now we have 45% in Germany, the same number is for it, but they don't want our German government to bring heavy weapons into Ukraine. And in the beginning, when the war started, there were more people, the percentage were higher on it, but slowly it's changing, and people are realizing that we need to have peace in Europe with Russia. And so there's only one way to communicate, to negotiate and find a solution for the problems we are having. Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed, Marion. Sue, do you want to add to that? You're muted.
Sorry, I'm not used to this. The only thing I want to add is that I hope as many people as possible will come to Lakenheath on the 21st of May and get this protest started.
Absolutely. Well said, Sue. Thank you very much indeed. And Tom, over to you for the final words.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you to the other speakers, and thank you to everyone who's participated, asked questions and listened in. I'll echo Sue's words. Let's make sure we're all there, if we possibly can be, on the 21st of May. But to conclude, I think two quite important questions have been posed at the end of this meeting. Is a nuclear-free Europe possible? And can NATO states sign up to the TPNW? Is a nuclear-free Europe possible? Well, yes, it is. It's not only possible, it's absolutely essential if we are to start to talk sensibly about actual peace, security, and to ensure that the very sharp and acute, I want to emphasize that, the sharp and acute nuclear threats that present themselves to us, if we're to ameliorate them, if we're to take them off the table, if we're to create security and safety, not just in Europe, but more widely globally, yes, a nuclear-free Europe is part and parcel of that. But when we talk about achieving peace, when we talk about a set of circumstances and a situation where peace seems possible, to talk seriously about that, we need to think about removing each and every roadblock to peace. Now, whatever is in our way, whatever stands in the way of our security, our safety, whatever stands in the way of disarmament and peace, we need to talk and think through how we remove those things. So that means us thinking through very carefully, how do we stop the US nuclear weapons coming back to Lakenheath? How do we get rid of Britain's Trident nuclear weapon system? How do we get US bombs out of Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Turkey? How do we disarm France? How do we challenge head on the nuclear armed alliance that is NATO? Because yes, NATO member states can sign up to the TP and W. So far as I understand it, in the legal framework and in legal terms, there is no single bit of law which says a NATO member state cannot sign up to the TPNW. And remember, NATO is a nuclear armed alliance, but not every single NATO member state is either a nuclear armed state in its own right or holds US nuclear weapons under NATO arrangements. So what's stopping them? What is stopping them? Well, the thing that is stopping them is best illustrated by the extreme efforts put in by NATO as an organisation to sabotage the TPNW, the repeated legal objections that they've raised, the persistent objector status. It's worth Googling that and finding out what that means. The way in which they've attempted to corral and organise NATO member states to not just ignore the TPNW, but to campaign against it. All of these things are important and worthy of taking note of. NATO is a roadblock to peace in Europe and more widely. NATO is a roadblock to peace, which is why CND, along with our sister peace and anti-nuclear organisations in Europe, are very clear that we need to get rid of it. NATO needs to be campaigned against. It's a roadblock. And each and every artifact of its activity, Lakenheath, all of the nuclear sharing bases in Europe, its drive towards militarizing Europe, we need to resist. Let's remove the roadblocks to peace. Let's start by making sure that US nuclear bombs do not return to Lakenheath. And join us on the 21st. Join CND if you're not already a member. If you are a member, get actively involved and engaged, because the more of us that there are, the more of a difference we can make. And the easier it will be to move those roadblocks out of the way. Thank you for joining us. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks very much indeed, Tom. So thanks everyone for joining us this evening. We hope some of you will be able to join us at Lakenheath on the 21st. If you're unable to get over there, please do highlight the issue on your local CND stall or hold a local meeting. If you go to our website, you'll be able to find information there about getting leaflets, about getting posters and so on. There's a new early day motion coming out in Parliament in the next few days, so you'll be able to lobby your MP to get them to sign up to that as well. So there's lots and lots of things that you can do. Please do some or all of them. And above all, thank you so much for your support for CND, and thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you to our speakers also. Bye-bye.